in this day and age of college football too, we're seeing a lot more general managers, and I think a big part of the storyline is particularly within the ACC. I mean, you see Andrew Luck taking over for Stanford. You see UCal with Ron Rivera. And you also see North Carolina with Michael Lombardi. And from the reports I've seen, he's getting paid upwards of, I think it's 1.5 million to be with Bill Belichick too. And especially, it's even more fascinating that him as a general manager, he was only there for one season with the Browns too. So it's been fascinating to see the different types of backgrounds that we've seen with general managers and also just how much power they have in general. So with that said, I mean, you can answer this whether within the ACC sense, just within a college football sense. How do you imagine the evolution of the college football GM expanding as college football turns into now a more and more of a NFL model?
So I think every team in the country has a general manager, even if it's not in title. Everyone has that sort of essentially a general manager. They're a liaison to your collective and to your big boosters. Obviously, we've seen that with schools like Stanford, like you said, in California, where they are doing more of a player evaluation model with their GM role. At Louisville, we do more of a liaison role, and we leave those decisions up to Jeff Brom. Clemson does the same thing. I'm not sure who their liaison is with their collective, but that's how they do it. But it's the most important. It's the most important thing outside of your head coach right now. Going, to be able to have that open and concise language with your collective on what's realistic from an NIL standpoint is major. Along with that, the current NCAA rules, which it's not like anyone follows them, but a collective cannot directly talk to a kid. A collective can directly talk to an agency or a player representation, but they can't talk to a kid until they have signed. So at that point, that's when that GM is going to really come to a good role of for recruiting on the side of the house. But every team has some sort of a guy like that. What I personally think, I think the best hire this whole season, this entire, including head coaches, it's not a head coach. It's what Oklahoma did with Jim Nagy. They hired him in as their general manager, and he's able to rally their NIL resources, realistically talk to kids. I mean, on top of that is Jim Nagy. He knows enough about the NFL and getting to the NFL. That's kind of his thing. But every team has it. It is going to be the standard going forward. And if a team doesn't have a general manager or anyone like that, they're 5 years behind everybody else. It's one of those things that we need to get realistic about as a sport. That yes, NIL's here. It's about to get shaken up again with rev share in a few months, and it's going to go to a completely different situation there. But you have to get a round turn on it and be realistic. These top 300 kids, these big level athletes, they all have player representation. You have to work with player representation, and that's where a GM is going to come into play.
Yeah, because I guess the other storyline too is to what degree do these GMs really have influence too? Because obviously, for example, if we stick with the ACC, like Mario Cristobal, like they're not Miami's not going to go hire a GM, and Mario Cristobal is going to be reporting to the GM. So I think a lot of the big parts of it is going to be kind of what the sort of structure is in general. Like Kirby Smart, like I was listening to one of his interviews, and he was saying, like, hey, we don't really do the whole GM thing because we want to do the more old school traditional approach where, hey, I sit down and I talk to your parents on your couch and say, hey, I'm going to take care of your kid, and they're going to get through the NFL. So I guess that's part of the fascination of it, because I guess for me as a fan, I always sit there and say to myself, anytime that college football can distinguish from the NFL, I think it's better. I think it's better in that regard. But in terms of looking out for the student athletes and all that stuff too, I do think they deserve to get paid. And I do think when all the kind of legal stuff all sort of come together, where there's not as much ambiguity, let's say, I think it will end up figuring itself out in the long term too.
Yeah, and that's why I really hesitate to say the GM term. I like to use that liaison term, because there are programs like Dabo Sweeney, he ain't gonna have a GM.
Yeah.
No one's gonna tell him how to
It
construct a
took him 5
roster.
seasons to even use the NIL a little
Yeah,
bit. So
yeah. But one thing that I would love to hit on, if you don't mind, since we're in this realm with
yeah, absolutely.
Nil, a little bit about player agency. So we always hear really bad things about agents. Like it's always a boogeyman if you open on three other agent says they want this much. Player agency and player representation are not inherently bad things. The issue being is we hear so many horror stories about these 22-year-old kids out of college with a business MBA that think that they're agents and then they massively screw things up and don't know how to negotiate. Um, there is player agency is a great thing actually, especially you have some amazing representation. You have guys like A&P Sports. You have guys like David Benzaken, for example. He's one of my favorites where these are guys that have worked in this space at the NFL, NBA, NHL level that are now transitioning also to college. Um, Agency's good. Agency is realistic. It works well with collectives, and they're just there to ensure that their players are in the best position possible. The biggest thing with agency is it's always going to be a two-way street in recruitments where a collective has to be realistic and then agency has to be realistic to come to that nice little happy medium. But that's negotiating in general is coming to that medium. If we didn't have widespread player agency like we do right now, I honestly think you would see more of these Nico situations because that's what we saw prior to this is we had somebody's high school coach or somebody's dad or someone's uncle
Yeah.
that wanted to call the shots here. And I mean, no offense, I'm sure those people are smart most of the time, but they're not certified. They don't have the industry
The industry
experience to fall
knowledge or
back
the
on. Yeah,
wherewithal. Yeah, exactly.
exactly. Because at the end of the day, what determines how much a player gets paid is how much they're worth to another team. Your price is ever evolving. I heard a horror story a few months ago. There was a kid at a Power Four school. He was making $100,000, and he was told, "Hey, another school." So he was going to school X, making $100,000. Midway through the season, his player representation got reached out to school by school wise NIL collective and said, "Hey, we'll pay your player $300,000 to come to our school." So that player says, "All right, cool." Enters the transfer portal in the winter session, and school Y tells him, "Hey, we'll give you $75,000." Well, his player representation tells the school, "Well, you offered us, 300. What's going on?" And school Y told him, "Oh, well, you were worth 300 then. Now you're not really getting much love in the transfer portal. Your value to us now is only 75,000."
Exactly. Everybody knows if you don't get it in writing, it didn't happen. So
Exactly. So it's it can be a good thing. It keeps the collectives in check. Not every single collective is always working in the player's best interest. At the end of the day, these are guys. Football's a business, and you got to progress the business a little bit. But yeah, we love agency. It's not a bad thing. Just get a lot of the silliness out. What I would love to see happen is some sort of resolution on like actual certifications for agencies, similar to how the NFLPA does it, NBAPA. You have to be certified as an agent. You have to go through a certification board. I think that'd be great for college football and college basketball for that.
exactly, because I mean theoretically, there's nothing really stopping from you and I sitting there saying we could
No.
start robbing Josh Sports Agency right now
Yeah.
and go hit up a couple Louisville players who are second, third string and try to get them to go to an FCS school or something for 100,000.
It's been offered to me before.
Yeah, exactly. I mean but it's good though that you brought that up too because I guess like when you listen to ESPN or you read those articles and things, a lot of people don't really talk about like what's best for the actual players themselves. So like everyone gets kind of caught up with, oh well, it's this price tag, or oh the collective's the problem, or oh the school's the problem. So it's really good that you brought that up too because as much as college football is turning into a professional sport to some degree, there is that level of I'll call it amateurism that I think that also makes it special, but it's also one of those things that I think it's easy to lose sight of. I mean, granted, yes, they are getting paid there is a level of professionalism, there is a standard that you have to uphold and whatnot too. But there's also this balance of, hey, these kids are probably never going to see as much money in their lifetime as they are going to right now. I mean, if you don't make it to the NFL and you have to work like the rest of us, if you end up making six figures a couple years out of school, you're doing pretty damn well.
Yeah, exactly. And this is all going to get turned on its head in a few months. We have this house settlement looming, which, I mean, that's a can of worms where the issue being, and in typical, I don't know if you want to blame the NCAA, who you want to blame for this. No one knows what's going on. There's been very little guidance, and it's probably going to be dropped on everyone's head. And that's gonna change things in itself. I mean, you're giving schools the access to $20 million and saying, "Hey, figure it out, buddy. You got to go for it." And that's where it's going to get really important there, because at that point, that's going to be all in-house money. So it's going to really change the recruiting process. Where collectives talking to players that you might not need to, because at that point you're doing it in-house from your house settlement money, your rev share. And you get to that GM role, that's where it's going to become really, really key. I think what's really interesting to me, just NIL space real quick.
Yeah.
Ross Dellinger, he's been reporting on the ACC media or ACC spring meetings. And for the ACC spring meetings this year, all the ADs and presidents, they just recently had essentially the NIL clearinghouse come in to speak to them. And 70% of past deals with collectives would have been denied this past year. But 90% of deals with public companies would have been approved. So you could see the entire collective industry somewhat go away. Again, though, and it's going to keep coming back to it, it's going to have to be from the NCAA giving us actual enforcement and giving us actual guidelines and rules to go by, because they've been so bad at it over the past 5 years with everything NIL.
I mean, I would
It's
push
got to get
back on
figured
that a
out.
little bit because I do think the NCAA has tried to in the past to enforce some things. Like, for example, we can talk about the Tennessee Nico thing. They tried to shut that down. And then once when Tennessee was like, hey, I'm going to sue you, all the other schools kind of came around and said, hey, we're just going to sue you too. And then it just got to a point where the NCAA can only hold off for so long too. Because now you're sitting
Yeah.
there saying, well, they kind of are supposed to be the de facto commissioner, boss, whatever you want to call it, and now they're kind of more just they just kind of just exist. It's almost like the vice president of the United States. Yes,
Yeah.
you have the title, but you're not really enforcing things other than the academic stuff, the conferences, and just kind of making sure that everything is supposed to happen as it should.
Yeah, and there's going to be an extra layer added to it. I have to give a disclaimer. We're talking about with rev share and all this. It's inherently somewhat of a political topic, so I apologize.
No, 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 no,
Um,
no, no. We're good. We're good.
um, with rev share, at the end of the day, you're talking about state-funded institutions giving private entities millions and millions of dollars.
Kentucky's
There's
an
gonna,
LLC now. University of Kentucky's
yeah.
athletic department's an LLC
It,
now.
oh, and it's one of the smartest things I've ever seen.
Yeah,
That's yeah. I like to crap on Kentucky a lot, but when I saw that news, I was like, that's very forward thinking. But you're talking about potentially state-funded institutions and, more importantly, taxpayer-funded institutions giving millions of dollars to private entities. There is going to be some oversight on this from the government.
absolutely.
I know we've already seen it recently with this whole Donald Trump NIL working group thing with Nick Saban. I don't
Yeah,
know how
yeah. It
realistic
seems like
that
it's more of a
is.
pipe dream right now, but it's
Yeah.
certainly possible. It's just like Nick Saban just ball this whole time, and it seems like he's enjoying, working with ESPN. I don't know
Yeah.
why I would even want to be doing all that.
Yeah, I don't know how realistic that is specifically, but there will be some sort of a congressional or House oversight look into this to figure out. And then along with that, you'll see that not only at the federal level, but at the state level, because these are taxpayer dollars that people have to be accountable for. So that's going to add another massive issue just to the enforcement side of the house. And then again, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to get overtly political. But this is going to continue to get fought at the court level for Title IX concerns.
Exactly, because every school has their own. You can talk about like Pittsburgh, for example. One of the big reasons that they didn't want to invest in NIL at the beginning was because they wanted to support, some of those Title IX sports. And then now they're coming to the realization, I hate to say it, that they're not making as much money. You're going to have to find that happy medium between supporting those Title IX sports, but also making sure the longevity of these sports are being, paid for somehow.
Exactly. And like the thing that I won't get too much into my thoughts on Title IX, but just realistically looking at this, you're talking about millions of dollars. This will continue to get fought at the congressional court level across all the different court districts, and we might need some hard and fast actual legislation to fight those fights, whatever way you want to go. Um, Me personally, I don't think that Title IX should be taken into account with the House settlement, but that's just personal. Um, but if that's the route you want to go, you got to put it set in stone with actual legislation. Same thing on the opposite. This you can't keep fighting this fight, because the way that this is going to work is it's going to be a constant flip flop of how does this work with Title IX, how does this work, and nobody wants that. We just give us hard and fast rules to follow. We'll try to follow the rules as best as possible, and don't make schools hire more people for their compliance department because most schools have already enough.
Yeah, it's that, and most people don't know this too, but a lot of athletic programs are barely even or not even breaking even. A lot of them are losing money. So on top of having to have the actual travel expenses, on top of now pretty much hiring a full blown general manager, scouting department, compliance department, what will you? And on top of that too, now with the ACC and their revenue share after the settlement with Clemson and Florida State, that adds a whole new layer to this whole thing.
Oh man, teams are going to sink, and I hate to say that. I don't want to see that happen, but teams are going to financially sink, and programs are going to financially sink, and at that point, you get back into the core of the issue where these are state funded institutions, and or again, I'm sorry, I'm trying not to dive too much into
No,
that
you're good.
aspect of
You're
it.
good.
I know that can be a very decisive topic for some people. But yeah, we always think about this from the Power Four level, SEC, Big Ten, Power Two, whatever. But the thing I keep going back to is, man, if I'm a Sun Belt school, I'm making $8 million a year off of my TV deal with ESPN. How is this making sense? I mean, you're talking about a $20 million expenditure on top of an operating expenditure of probably close to $40 million. You're $60 million in the hole, and you're making 8 million essentially. I mean, maybe add on an additional 10 million for individual sponsorship deal with the university, ticket sales, whatnot. But I mean, that's a massive deficit that you're operating at. I hope it doesn't happen, but it would not surprise me if you saw teams drop down to FCS.
Yeah, because
At
I think
all.
it's going to start trickling. I mean, we're already seeing in the FCS a little bit, but it's going to trickle down the FCS and Division Two, and then slowly but surely, if there is a hypothetical power, power conference such as a Big Ten and a Big 12 merging or something like that. Again, that hasn't happened yet, but if that does happen, I think that's when we'll kind of see those dominoes fall of some of these schools that aren't as football forward, let's say,
Mhm.
that could possibly kind of trickle down, and then college football turns into the top 30 teams, almost like a Premier League, where you have the top 30 teams who play in Premier, and then you have like the minor leagues or the baby leagues, where you have like the Wake Forest of the world or the Virginias, or fill in the blank,
Mhm.
whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, I it is a rabbit hole that we will see unfold in real time very, very soon. I just My big thing is I hope it doesn't shake up college football too much, but if you want my honest opinion, I think this is the biggest change in college football since the invention of the forward pass.